In this episode, we're going to be looking at Wally Drag, the Excel-based drag racing simulator. G'day, I'm Trav. Welcome back to the Fast and the Nerdy. I've decided to build an Excel-based lap time simulator for fun, named after my dog Wally. Using Excel will limit its ability, but I thought it would be cool to build something that everyone could use. I might end up converting it to Python or MATLAB down the road, but we'll see how we go. The first step was to build the acceleration model, and I thought why not turn it into a drag racing simulator, and from that, Wally Drag was born. Here we have the working screen. As you can see, we have some nice graphs. Down the bottom here, we have the torque and power curves. Next to that is the tractive force graph. Above it, we have the RPM and gear selected graph. Besides that, we have the speed and acceleration versus time graph. And then below that, we have the minimum and maximum weights on the front and rear axles throughout the drag race. Next, we have our inputs. These are the areas under the blue headings. We have some vehicle info here. We have some tyre data here. We have the torque curve down here, the driveline ratios and efficiencies over here. Below that, we have the aero, we have the inertia, and underneath that, we have whether or not we are going up a hill. As you can see, this doesn't take into account banking or lateral weight transfer. I've assumed that the track is fairly level. Next, we have our results, and these are underneath the green headings. So we have the time slip here. I've also put the top speed of the car and the 0 to 100 kilometers an hour time. And then below that we have the shift points. So we have both the RPM and the kilometers per hour that was shifted at for this time. Along with that, we have the ability to optimize both the vehicle and the gearbox ratios using the Excel add-in solver. You'll need to have that installed to use these, but even without them, the program is still pretty powerful. Along with the optimization, I've put some more macros in to help make this more useful. The first one is the ability to print the inputted values, the results, the power and torque curve, and the tractive force graph in a handy one sheet. We just press the print PDF button, confirm that we would want to print it. It then saves it as a PDF using the car, setup and track inputs as the name. Once all that's done, out pops a sheet similar to this one. This allows us to save certain models for future reference. The next macro is a clear all inputs button. This one saves 30 seconds or so by doing exactly what it says on the tin. It clears all inputs. The simulator works by first calculating the RPM required for a certain velocity. I've used 0 to 100 meters per second divided into 0.5 meter per second blocks. If you were, however, going to write something like this in MATLAB or Python, I would recommend calculating the theoretical max and setting that as your upper limit, then divide it by a large number, 200 for example, to get your equal steps, and then calculating only for those steps. But I found in Excel it was far easier to just have a set velocity and work forward from there, blanking out unrealistic values by creating an error. This is especially true once I got further into it. There were a few curveballs that this way eliminated. Anyway, it calculates the RPM for a certain velocity by working backwards. So we have the car velocity seen at the wheels. We then calculate that velocity back all the way through the driveline to get the engine RPM for that speed in each of its gears. Wally can handle up to 7 gears. It then uses the torque curve and interpolates between the points to get the torque produced at that calculated RPM in each gear. Next, it uses these torque figures and works forwards using the driveline data and the dynamic wheel radius to calculate the engine tractive force at the wheels. As you probably figured, torque curves don't go to 0. And you're right, which did make me scratch my head for a bit. We could put a 0 point in, connect it to the actual graph and get the equation of the line, but we would need to assume a lot for that. But as we don't leave the line at 0 RPM, we can solve this dilemma and make it more realistic by putting in a launch RPM. As long as you are launching at an RPM equal to or above the lowest inputted torque value, Wally realizes that it is launching and uses this value for our tractive force. It then continues to hold this RPM until the engine tractive force exceeds it. We can see it here in the flat part of the engine tractive curve. Now that we are moving, Wally calculates the tractive force in each gear and then selects the maximum tractive force as the engine tractive force. Whilst it is doing that, it also looks at what gear has that tractive force value and jots it down, giving us our gear and realistic RPM graph with its sawtoothed appearance. Currently it doesn't take into account clutch or the time it takes to change a gear, but you could add that in here and have the road loads drop the speed further during gear changes if you'd like. So from what we've done so far, we have half of the tractive force graph and the RPM and gear graphs done. But as you know, cars are also grip limited, so the next step is to calculate the tractive force at the tyres. To do that, we calculate the drag, lift, inertias, grade effect, and the previous step's acceleration to get the weight on each of the axles. We multiply the drive axle's weight with the tyre's coefficient of friction and the fudge factor, and we have the axle tractive force on the driven wheels. I haven't taken into account tyre load sensitivity here, but by using the fudge factor, you should be able to fudge the coefficient of friction to tweak the results to real-world times. I would like to incorporate it, or some form of tyre model in the future, but I might save that for the Python or MATLAB versions. Another thing that I haven't taken into account is the effect of the engine torque twisting the chassis and reducing load on one of the driven wheels. If you wanted to, that shouldn't be too hard to include, and neither would the effect of an open diff. I've assumed everyone at the drags has a locked diff. Once we've done all of that, we then take the minimum of the engine and axle tractive force, and we use Newton's equation to calculate acceleration. We've already calculated the road loads and inertias, so these get taken into account here as well. From here, it isn't too hard to calculate the different distances covered over time, or time to a distance or speed. So we now have all the info we need to create the tractive force graph and then plot the tractive force available to the driver. The orange line is the axle tractive force and the blue is the tractive force available to the driver. In this example, we are grip limited at the start, so the tractive force available to the driver follows the axle tractive force, but after here, we are power limited, so it now follows the engine tractive curve. Here, where the road loads exceed the tractive force, we are now drag limited, or road load limited, but I've only used the drag force and the rolling resistance as my road loads. Interestingly for this car, we can see that top speed is achieved in 5th gear, so 6th gear is really just for emissions and highway cruising. Now that we know how it works, I'll quickly show you how to use it. Simply input your car data. As I said before, the 3 variables at the top are what your file will be called if you want to save it. Here I've done an example of a VYSS ute. I couldn't find some of the info, so I've just taken a guess. Don't take the numbers too seriously. But now that we've inputted all the data, if we wanted to, for example, optimize the weight of the car, we can click mass here. Select what we want to optimize it for. I'm going to choose quarter mile. And then give it a percentage. I'm going to say 10%. And we can see that it has calculated the lower and higher values for us. These become our constraints for Solver. We then simply click optimize, and assuming everything is alright, we should get an answer. And we can see that the mass has dropped from 1550 down to 1410, and our quarter mile time has dropped down from 15.3 to 15.27. As we're using Solver, I would recommend mostly using this for finding what has the biggest impact on times and then narrowing in on it manually. For example, you can optimize the gear ratios for all the gears. If we just click on here and go down to all. But Solver struggles with this. It will show you the gears that probably need tweaking first, but won't give you the answer. It's too complex for it. Also, as it's Solver, you can't go back after using it. So make sure you print out or write down your inputted numbers before you optimize it so you can change them back if needed. But even without optimizing, by looking at the traction force graph, we can get some good info. Here we can clearly see the car is grip limited down low, and then it is drag limited up top. So for this car, if we wanted to increase times, getting more load over the back end would probably be where the low-hanging fruit is. So if we, instead of having 53% on the front, we dropped it back down to 50%. We could see that the quarter mile time, we now have a 14-second car from a 15-second car. But if you were instead going for top speed, reducing drag would be where you'd want to focus your initial efforts on. If you are, I have a video on internal drag. I'll leave a link to it at the end and chuck it down in the description. And that's it. Hope you enjoy using it. My VBA skills aren't the best, so if you clean that area up, let me know. I'd love to see it. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, tuck them down below or hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. And I forgot to say you can download this from my website, link in the description, and have a great day.